Welcome back everyone to another video, Fantasy Girl back in action. And today we're going to be talking about a subject that I think a lot of people have been wondering about ever since we first learned about the different shards of Final Fantasy XIV, the different parallel universes of the source in which we hail from. Now, we've so far been to two confirmed worlds. We've been born on the source, and we visited the first. However, there's another shard that we have visited that I think some people tend to forget, and that is the 13th, or also known as the Void. So today we're going to be talking about a very important question. While it was possible for us to save the first, is it possible for us to save the 13th? Okay, so a quick bit of history about the 13th. So the 13th is one of the shards that was split apart from the original source when Hydaelyn and Zodiac did battle thousands of years ago, which was born from the Sundering. Now, the 13th was a parallel universe of the source, like the original world, and apparently at some point in the past, possibly like several hundred, if not thousand years ago, something ended up happening that ended up drowning the world in darkness. Now, we did learn kind of bits and pieces of what happened way back then, and it seems that really what happened was that it was Egeyorm's fault. So, yes, Egeyorm was one of the Ascians, and she was in charge of the 13th, of eventually causing enough chaos there upon the 13th to trigger a rejoining, and basically merge the 13th back with the original source. However, it seems that she got a bit too carried away with her duties there and ended up creating like this unusable void. So basically, even the Ascians considered the void to be completely unsalvageable, and they just kind of left it there. I really don't know what they were planning on doing with the 13th because, I mean, the original plan was to rejoin all the worlds eventually, so I really don't know what they were ever going to plan on doing with the 13th. I mean, it's certainly possible that they may have had some other kind of plans, like being worked on or set up, like when the time came, they could find some way to force a rejoining with the 13th shard. I mean, we'll never know for sure, I'm guessing. So, thanks to a combination of several different side quests, including the role quest and the Warring Triad, we are introduced to a boy named Unakalhai. Now, Unakalhai was one of the special Echo users. He could use the Echo, and he was apparently one of those would-be champions who did try to save the 13th, especially when things were really starting to go bad. Now, he explains that even on the 13th, there were primals that were constantly being summoned, and there were heroes there to kind of battle them back and destroy them. However, they were summoned so often that they had to find creative ways of sealing them up to prevent them from being summoning. Unakalhai explains that the champions who fought upon that ruined star were corrupted by the captured essence of the primals, twisted into incarnations of darkness. Those of the light who stood to oppose them were but suckling babes in comparison. Unakalhai then goes on to explain that he was still young and that everyone was just kind of fighting each other and they were eventually consumed by the darkness, and basically all that was left was an empty void. Now, Unakalhai was one of only two people that we know of so far who were lucky enough to escape the destruction of the 13th, or I guess unlucky depending on how you look at it. One, of course, was Unakalhai, the other was Cilia. After seeing the destruction of their home, they were basically recruited by the Ascians to help them find some way of saving the star, doing something to prevent this from happening again. So Cilia eventually went with Mitron and Logdrift to the first, where she would help prepare everything for another rejoining upon that star and cause another flood, but only a little bit. Basically, she didn't want to destroy that particular world. She didn't want a flood to happen, this flood of light. No, she wanted a rejoining to happen because in her eyes, that was better than risking another flood. Meanwhile, Unakalhai was kind of recruited by Elidibus and served as kind of his, I guess, assistant or maybe subordinate or something. And eventually, he was sent to the Scion. So Elidibus sent him to the Source, where Unakalhai ended up helping with the Primals, the Warring Triad, I'm still not 100% sure why that was. I think it's really mostly about balance again, that he knew that if the Warring Triad were to escape, it would pretty much destroy the source. I mean, at least that's kind of the impression I'm getting. And so those two parted ways. They haven't seen or spoken to each other since then. However, after everything that happened in Shadowbringers, where we eventually ended up going to the First, which had almost fallen to the Flood of Light. So there was only the one continent that was left. We did end up meeting Celia. We learned of her role in this. We learned of the other warriors of light who sacrificed their lives to try to give this world one last chance. And after finishing up everything with patch 5.3 and all the role quests, Celia seems to have come to like a sort of, I guess, peace within herself. I don't think she's fully forgiven herself for her role in almost destroying that world, especially in what happened with Oddbird and the others, but I think that she knows that this is where she needs to be, and she's going to continue to keep the legacy of her friends alive, and basically keep their memories from being defamed or like twisted over time like it has been. Meanwhile, with Unicalhai, we ended up meeting him sometime after we defeated the Warring Triad. He asked us about the First, and we told him about Celia. And Unicalhai admits that he really hasn't had much to do with pretty much anything since the Warring Triad, especially if you completed the Warring Triad way back in Heavensward, as I do think a lot of people have. He's just kind of been hanging around the Rising Stones with nothing to do. So, especially after he learned about their progress in the First, and how they're slowly being able to bring life back to it, that gave him a sense of hope. A hope that maybe it is possible to save the 13th, because up till now he didn't seem to think that was possible, but now he has proof. He has like real proof in front of him that it is possible, though it's going to be very difficult. So he decides to go and visit Celia. He wants to go to the First so he could talk things over with her and see if maybe they could possibly find a way to save the 13th after all. So in the end, we agree. We do end up taking him back to the First. We reintroduce him to Celia, who's very surprised to see him there. Now, while he arrives on the First, he's introduced immediately to Bet-Luke, who he tells who he is, like where he's from and everything else. And Bet-Luke has the suggestion that, well, it might be possible, but first things first, we really need to get a better view of the condition of the 13th before we go any further. And he comes up with a suggestion that maybe if we can open up just even a small temporary door to the 13th, he can send in a proxy to examine and take stock of the whole situation, and using that data, that will give us somewhere to be. And upon hearing about the idea of void gates, or as we know them now as hollows, we introduce Unicalhai to Taynor, who, if you had played the role quest for the magical DPS, then you would know all about Taynor and his connection to Nailbird, and now they were able to open up like very small gateways to the 13th, which they refer to as hollows. And thanks to Nailbird's crystal, Unicalhai picks up on that very quickly. He ends up working alongside with Taynor in order to open up a void gate, which Bet-Luke then sends his own little proxy inside it to examine everything. And I'm guessing like he just did like a quick surveillance of the entire void. Like I doubt that he was able to take stock of the whole place, but I'm saying like maybe at least a decent size area, just like a good idea of everything that's going on there before it came back. And Bet-Luke did say that he needed time to be able to look over the data and just see what to do from there. But he did confess that it could take years before we're able to take another step forward, which Unicalhai responds with, "I've got nothing but time, and let's do it." So now that we're here, what is the possible future for the 13th? Is it possible that we can bring the 13th shard back from complete and utter oblivion? Well, I mean, it is a fantasy game. It's certainly possible, and the way that they made it sound like, yeah, that does sound like it's highly possible. Do I personally think that it's going to be a whole expansion's worth? I mean, personally, I think that would be really cool. I'm all up to exploring like other worlds and other shards. I mean, we still got plenty of other shards out there to choose from. I want to be able to visit each and every one of them eventually. Yeah, and I can imagine, like, we go to one shard which is more, I guess, technology based instead of like magical based like some of the others. We go to another one that's like overrun with like giant dinosaurs or something. We go to the next one, which is maybe reverted back to like a nuclear war or something, and everyone's like beating each other with sticks or rocks or something. Like, hey, it's possible. We don't know what's going on in the other shards. I'm guessing like the landscape though is going to be pretty similar to what we've seen already in Norvront and Eorzea. But hey, what can you do? Do I personally though think that we're going to be getting a whole expansion? Well, I do think that it would be really awesome, like I said, that we had a whole expansion dedicated to the 13th. Do I think that we're going to be getting that right away? No, I do not. Personally, I think that it's just a bit too soon after Shadowbringers to be introducing us to a completely different world. Especially since 6.0 is supposed to be like the final expansion that we have dealing with the Ascians and Hydaelyn and Zodiark and everything there. Personally, I think it's going to be much more likely that we're going to be finishing off with Garlemald and the whole war there and find some way of dealing with Hydaelyn and Zodiark. I'm going to be making a whole other video about that eventually. So that's at least what I personally think. So it's definitely not going to be 6.0 that's going to be that expansion if they do make that into an expansion. I think maybe closer to like 7.0 or 8.0. It really depends on how far they want to go with Final Fantasy XIV, which I hope is going to continue on for a long time. But yeah, they don't really need to go into a whole expansion though, that's just the thing. I think it's very likely that we could have what they did with Eden. They could end up having us like go through the hollows into like these little tiny pockets of the void, and by destroying like very specific void scent, like powerful enough void scent, we could release the light back into the void and end up bringing light back to basically this whole world. Certainly possible, it could happen. Or better yet, it could be like with maybe Eureka or the Southern Front, where we're going into like these little tiny pockets of area and just battling with powerful monsters and just slowly, I don't know, like trying to fight our way through like these very specific quests, trying to find some way that we can end up saving this particular world. And that is another thing. If we do choose to go that route, then we won't have to wait until like 7.0 to be able to see the void again. So we could very realistically have it in 6.0 content. Like maybe if we could have that as the new Eureka or the new raid content. And we're going to be part of like the task force that's going to be set up at the end of the post role quest story as part of an expedition team. But I will say this, if they do have an expansion set in the void, we could have like the Warrior of Light Shard turned Void Sense as like the final boss. That would be really cool. Seeing how it is possible for a Warrior of Light to become a Sin Eater, like both with what nearly happened to us and what happened to Oddbird's friends, the other Warriors of Light, I don't see why a Warrior of Light can't become a Void Scent too. That would make for an epic fight, and like we would be battling against a fractured piece, like a sundered piece of the original soul that we were part of. And maybe like at the end of it we have another rejoining or something, or set that particular soul free, and maybe even return to the person that they were before. That is so many ways that we can work about that. That would be beyond cool. So yeah, do I think it will be a whole expansion? I really hope so someday. I would really like to investigate that. My only fear is that it may be a little bit too much like Shadowbringers, only like on the opposite spectrum. We'll be bringing light back to the void, we'll be going around like hunting like very specific monsters, like particular void scent in order to release the light and just dispel the darkness. It could go any number of ways, so I do hope that if they do choose to go the entire expansion route someday, then they find it, they make it a little bit different. They make it unique from how Shadowbringers was. So while I do really hope so that they do something about that in the future, like even if it's not a whole expansion, I do think it's going to be more along the lines of a Eureka or Eden based quest line, because I don't think that they would set up like a whole thing there, like at the end of the Void quest that we've already had so far with Celia and Unicalhi and the others, without it eventually branching out into its own story. So that brings up another question though. Let's say, for example, like under the best case scenario, we do end up going to the Void. We end up defeating like the powerful Void Scent, and light is eventually restored to the 13th. Can life continue on in the 13th despite everything that happened? Well, I mean, it's not going to be easy, particularly because the conditions of the Void are very different than what nearly happened to the first. So these two worlds, like the first and the 13th, they almost ended up succumbing like in the exact same way, only on opposite sides of the spectrum. The Void was consumed by a flood of darkness, and the first was nearly consumed by a flood of light. So the biggest difference here, of course, besides the light and dark spectrum thing, is that the first was not completely destroyed. Granted, 9/10 of this entire world were wiped out and became the empty Void, but that one piece, like that 1/10 that survived, is the key to the first survival. Because on that continent, we still have people, we still have creatures, we have animals, we have recorded history that survived. Like, even if it is just a tiny piece of that world, it still survived. You know, life finds a way. And because of the Eden quest lines, we're able to start to bring life back into the empty. So by the end of the Eden storyline here at patch 5.4, like, we've already done a decent start. We've already have like this little oasis, like right here in the middle of the empty. Like, we have, I'm guessing, like maybe several dozen, if not at least a couple hundred miles of life, like right back here in the empty. However, Urianger did state that it seems that other similar oases have also started opening up here in the empty as well. So imagine the empty as one great big vast desert, because that's pretty much what it is. It's just like an empty void where there's nothing but like this white sand everywhere. But every few thousand miles you do see like a little oasis, like a little tiny speck of life here. You have like plants and trees, you have water, like decent soil and everything's just that will reach out to every single part of the empty. But even Urianger admits that these tiny spots are just for now, and it's going to spread out to everywhere else eventually, but that could easily take several decades at the very least. But we've already made good progress, and this is actually a really good place to start off because we do have like a solid base camp here. Like, I don't even want to call it the empty anymore. We'll just call this place Eden. So we've already have a decent place here in Eden, and it's already being talked about planning future expeditions into the empty and start to explore it and possibly reach out to the other little bits of oasis here and just make sure that everything is going according to plan, that everything is reaching out, the ether is flowing normally, and eventually the empty won't be called the empty anymore. It will come back to life. And during that period, more expeditions are going to be planned. They'll start to bring back new resources that they discover in these new locations and start to share that with not only the people in these other oases, but they'll bring it back to Norvrant, which will continue to grow and expand. People are going to start falling in love. They'll start having families and having kids. Especially now that they don't need to worry so much about sin eaters attacking their families and turning them into sin eaters or just devouring them for their ether and all that. So families are going to start growing up, they're going to start having kids, and these kids are going to want to know more about the outside world, so they'll join the expeditions as well. They will start to have settlements in like all of these little oases as they continue to spread out and continue to maybe repopulate like the ruins of these ancient cities. Well, I say ancient, but these old cities. And that's the thing, it is possible to bring this world completely back from the very brink of destruction and grow into something even better than it was before. Life will find a way, like especially because that one little continent is all that is really needed to repopulate the world and just bring it back to life, basically. So that's what's happening on the first. It is possible that we can save the first. It's just going to take a long time. It's not a matter of if they can do it, it's really a matter of how long it's going to take, which, like I said, it's probably going to take several decades, several generations. I would say no fewer than maybe 200-300 years before we start to see a semblance of what the world used to be, like returning to and everything else there. So the first is well on its way to recovering. But that leaves us to the 13th again. Can the 13th recover in the same way? And that's the tricky part, because really nothing survived in the void. Like, once the flood came, that was it. Even if they do manage to bring the light back to the void, what then? Like, there are no other survivors that we know of, like, apart from Unicalhi and Celia, and they're, I guess, technically dead. I mean, they're technically like ghosts or something. Everyone else that they knew and cared about were basically turned into voidsents. So, I mean, unless they end up finding other survivors, like, I don't know, I just keep thinking, like, maybe some kind of cryomatic, like, chamber hidden deep below the earth or something, where we have, like, pods where people are sleeping, or maybe they were turned to crystal, like the l'Cie from Final Fantasy XIII, and that eventually the people will be able to wake up if we give them enough reason to. I mean, unless something like that happens, and like maybe like a tiny pocket of the 13th population did end up surviving somehow, I really don't see how they'll be able to bring the populace back to the world. I mean, unless you find another way of turning the voidsent back into people. I mean, I guess that's also possible. Certainly is possible to revert somebody back from nearly becoming Sin-Eaters into people, so I really don't know about that. I mean, they're going to have to get really creative with the storyline for the 13th if they do choose to go that route. But yeah, I mean, if we can somehow find that, like if we find like some kind of other survivors of the 13th, and even if we start small, like we just start off with one small area and maybe help at least get them started, like get them like a safe place that they can call home, and just teach them how to fight against the voidsents after we bring life back there. And yeah, it is possible if we can somehow accomplish all of that. So if we do end up going that route, like, I do hope that Square Enix does find some kind of clever way of tying that all in. Like, they find some way to bring back the 13th. I would really like to see that. And I do really, really hope that if we do get a chance to go back there someday, that we do something about it. Because, I mean, Unicalhi did say that he would love nothing more than to be able to walk with us, like, back in his home world, like, look out to a much brighter future. And I don't think that they would have put that in if they didn't have something special planned with Unicalhi and his new friends. So I guess right now it's not a matter of if we'll be able to go back to the void someday, it's a matter of when. Anyway, everyone, thank you all so much for watching. What do you think? Do you think that it is possible we'll be able to go to the 13th? If so, do you think that it is possible that we can save it? Am I possibly missing something that I may have overlooked? Just let me know what you think. Like, if you have any theories of what this whole little adventure could entail or how it's going to end. Either way, I would love to hear any kind of theory. If you have any requests that you would like to make of me about any kind of future videos, please drop that in the link down below. And leave a big thumbs up if you like this video. It really helps cheer me up, and it always helps validate my feelings, I guess, to continue to make more videos. So yeah, until next time, everyone, thank you all so much for watching. Have a good rest of your day, and this is Fantasy Girl signing out.